Her house was slowly sliding into the ocean. But there were her children inside. Officials were already on their way to pick them up. And her husband's killer was standing on the doorstep. And the moment his hammer landed on her chest, time stopped. This house wasn't a trap. It was a weapon. The harness bit into Sarah Miller's waist as she leaned into the angle, her body a human pendulum compensating for the 15-degree tilt of the kitchen floor. She clipped the carabiner to the ceiling bolt, tested with her full weight 3 times, the way Elias had taught her, and began the morning traverse. One hand gripped the tarred rope, the other balanced the dented tin tray loaded with 3 bowls of watery oatmeal. The liquid sloshed against the rim, threatening to spill. Her slate-gray eyes tracked the distance. 12 feet to the hallway. Another 8 to the low-side bedroom where the children waited, their hollow stomachs louder than any alarm clock. The floorboards groaned beneath her boots, not the comfortable settling of an old house, but the prolonged whine of wood under unbearable stress. Sarah moved rope to rope, her thick, yellowed calluses absorbing the friction without flinching. Her fingers found the next anchor point by memory. The tray dipped. She compensated. The oatmeal steadied. Through the warped parallelogram of the kitchen window, the valley spread below like a promise the world refused to keep. Somewhere down there, people walked on floors that didn't require climbing gear. Their children ate breakfast at tables instead of huddled in corners where the walls met at survivable angles. Sarah's left hand tapped against her thigh, 1, 2, 3, counting the seconds of stability before the next shift. The house never stopped moving. Micro-adjustments. Settling. The slow surrender to gravity that would come for them all eventually. The diesel roar shattered the morning like a fist through glass. Sarah's head snapped toward the window. The tray tilted. A bowl slid, and she caught it with her hip, the hot oatmeal scalding through her worn jeans. She didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on the ridge. The bulldozer crested the hill like a mechanical beast, its yellow paint obscene against the gray morning. The blade caught the weak sunlight, serrated and hungry. The operator positioned it precisely at the property line, close enough to cast its shadow over the garden where Sarah had coaxed 3 tomato plants into reluctant life, far enough to remain legal. Exhaust fumes drifted through the cracked window, diesel and threat. Sarah unclipped from the rope and set the tray on the angled counter, wedging it against the wall to prevent the slide. Her breathing remained steady, in for 4 counts, out for 4, but her fingers drummed faster against her thigh. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The black SUV rolled up behind the bulldozer, pristine and alien. Its shine belonged to a different world, one where dirt was an inconvenience rather than a permanent companion. Julian Vane stepped out. Even at this distance, Sarah could see the absurdity of his polished Italian leather shoes against the dusty, uneven terrain. He moved with the slow confidence of a man accustomed to the world reshaping itself around his preferences. His silver-blonde hair remained perfectly in place despite the wind that whipped Sarah's own dark strands across her face. He held a cream-colored envelope. Sarah's jaw tightened. She moved toward the door, her body automatically adjusting to the slant, the counter lean so ingrained she'd forgotten what vertical felt like. Her hand closed around the cast-iron skillet hanging from its hook by the entrance, not a weapon, she told herself. A tool. Everything in this house was a tool for survival. She stepped onto the porch. Vane approached without hesitation, his pale blue eyes taking in the guide ropes, the climbing harness still visible under her jacket, the way the house leaned like a drunk toward the cliff edge. His smile was surgical. Mrs. Miller. His voice came out quiet, forcing her to strain to hear over the bulldozer's idle rumble. I apologize for the early hour, but this matter requires immediate attention. You brought a bulldozer to apologize. Sarah's voice emerged low and flat, each word rationed. Insurance, Mrs. Miller. This property has been declared a structural menace to the county. I'm here to serve you formal notice. He extended the envelope. You have 48 hours to vacate. Sarah didn't take it. The house has stood for 100 years. The house is a death trap. Surely you see, he gestured vaguely at the ropes, the impossible angle. No child should live like this. Behind him, a burly security guard emerged from the SUV carrying a wooden stake topped with a bright orange sign, "Condemned, uninhabitable by order of Oakhaven County." "Don't." Sarah descended 2 steps, the skillet still in her hand. The guard ignored her. He marched toward the soft earth near the front door, the stake raised like a spear. Sarah moved to intercept, but Vane's hand came up in a lazy wave. "Please proceed, Marcus. This is my home." Sarah positioned herself between the guard and the planting spot. Marcus didn't slow. At 6'2" and 240 pounds, he'd spent a career moving obstacles. His massive hand closed on Sarah's shoulder and shoved. The porch was already angled toward the drop-off. The force multiplied. Sarah's heels caught on splintering wood, her arms windmilled, and for one terrible second, she teetered over the abyss. 300 feet down, the mouth of the Blackwood mine gaped, its milky blue water glowing with mineral poison. Her hand shot out, catching the guide rope. She hauled herself forward, her shoulder screaming, her heart a hammer against her ribs. Marcus grunted and raised the stake again, moving past her dismissed body. Sarah's fingers found the specific rope, the one Elias had marked with 3 knots. She unhooked it. The porch floorboards shifted. The tension redistributed across the structure in ways that defied simple physics. Marcus's next step landed on polished wood angled 40 degrees instead of 30. His eyes went wide. He tried to compensate, but his weight was already committed. His arms flailed. His boots lost purchase on the slick surface. He slid. The railing exploded in a shower of splinters as his bulk crashed through it. He landed in the thorny brambles 8 feet below, cursing and thrashing. Vane watched with eyes that refused to blink. "Your guard should have asked about the house rules," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. Vane pulled a satellite phone from his jacket. His movements were unhurried, theatrical. He tapped the screen with one finger, then held it up so Sarah could see the confirmed submission timestamp. "I filed a danger to minors report with Child Protective Services 3 days ago. The structural instability. The climbing equipment required for basic movement. The sheer drop-off." He smiled. "They're already en route, Mrs. Miller. Should arrive within the hour." The words hit harder than Marcus's shove. Sarah's fingers went numb. The skillet slipped an inch before she caught it. Her children. Elias's children. The only things in the world worth protecting. "You can't." "I can. I have. The county agrees your children deserve better than a death trap held together with ropes and delusion." He pocketed the phone. "Of course, if you were to accept my generous offer for the property, we could make a call. Explain it was a misunderstanding. The children could stay with you in appropriate housing while we transition the land to its proper use." Sarah's vision narrowed to a tunnel. At the far end stood Vane, his perfect hair, his perfect shoes, his perfect certainty. Silence fell. In that silence, something stirred. The sound came from deep within the house, a low-frequency hum that Sarah felt in her bones before she heard it. The wooden kitchen clock, silent for 3 years since Elias's death, began to vibrate. The pitch was subsonic, a pressure that made her teeth ache. The glassware in the kitchen rattled. Sarah's breathing synchronized with the pulse. In hum out hum. Her heartbeat matched its rhythm. When her anger spiked, the vibration intensified. When she forced calm, it smoothed. Vane and Marcus showed no reaction. The sound existed only for her. Sarah's gaze swept the property, and stopped. The stray dog. The mangy shepherd mix she'd fed bacon grease and stale bread to yesterday morning, thinking it needed kindness. It sat perfectly still beside Vane's SUV, unnaturally disciplined for a supposed stray. Morning light caught the collar. Not rope. Leather and steel, with a small black rectangle embedded in the band. A camera. A tracker. Her stomach turned. Days of surveillance. The dog had mapped every room, recorded every conversation. Evidence for the CPS report. Vane followed her stare and smiled. He raised 2 fingers to his lips and whistled, sharp, commanding. The dog didn't move. Vane's smile faltered. He whistled again. Kaiser. Come. The dog's ears flattened. Its lips peeled back from yellow teeth. A growl emerged from deep in its chest, directed entirely at Vane. Kaiser, heel. Vane's voice rose, losing its practiced quiet. The dog lunged. Vane jerked his hand back, narrowly avoiding the snap of jaws. Kaiser turned, trotted to the base of the porch steps, and sat. His body formed a living barrier between Sarah and the men. The hum from the clock intensified. The porch beneath Sarah's feet vibrated in sympathy. Marcus scrambled out of the brambles, bleeding from a dozen scratches. Sir, we should. Get in the car. Vane's face had gone pale, his control cracking. He backed toward the SUV without taking his eyes off Kaiser. This isn't over, Mrs. Miller. The county will remove those children, and this house will come down. The bulldozer operator, sensing the shift, killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound. Vane's SUV reversed down the hill in a spray of gravel. The bulldozer followed, its treads churning ruts into the earth. Sarah stood on the tilting porch, the skillet heavy in her hand. Kaiser remained at his post, his tail moving in a slow, steady sweep. The house hummed around her like a living thing, and for the first time since Elias died, Sarah wondered if she was truly alone. The sirens came from the valley like wolves calling to the moon. Sarah stood at the warped parallelogram of the kitchen window, her fingers drumming against her thigh, 1, 2, 3, counting the seconds between each mechanical wail. Blue and red light pulsed against the low-hanging clouds, painting the house's rotting siding in ghostly strobes. The authorities were coming. The county was coming. They would take her children and call it mercy. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, stopping the rhythm. The lights grew brighter with each pulse, closer with each breath. Minutes. She had minutes. Behind her, Emma and Thomas huddled in the low-side corner of the kitchen where the walls met at the only survivable angle for sitting. Emma's arms wrapped around her younger brother's shoulders, her 10-year-old face carrying the weight of someone 3 times her age. Neither child spoke. They'd learned months ago to read the tension in their mother's shoulders the way sailors read approaching storms. Stay here. Sarah's voice came out low and flat, each word rationed. Don't move until I come back. She crossed to the front entrance, her body automatically counterleaning into the 15-degree tilt. The heavy oak door hung crooked in its frame, a casualty of the same settling foundation destroying everything else. She grabbed the iron handle and pulled, throwing her full weight into the motion. The door resisted. Sarah braced her boot against the frame and hauled again. The wood groaned, shifted an inch, then swung backward on its compromised hinges. The strike plate sat 3 inches too high, a gap the tilt had created. The door refused to catch. She slammed it forward. Gravity dragged it open again, yawning into the night like a mouth refusing to close. No. The word escaped through clenched teeth. She tried the deadbolt. The mechanism ground against metal, bent from years of the house's slow surrender. Useless. The sirens shrieked louder. Sarah's breathing accelerated, in for 4 counts, out for 4, but the rhythm shattered when glass exploded in the parlor. The sound came sharp and violent, followed by the heavy crunch of boots on debris. Not the authorities. Not yet. Someone else had arrived first. She spun toward the kitchen, her hand already reaching for the cast-iron skillet on its hook, but froze when a massive silhouette filled the parlor doorway. The hammer stood 6'4" in his steel-toed boots, his bald head catching the pulsing lights from outside. The small sledgehammer tattoo behind his ear seemed to move in the shadows. His breathing came heavy, like a bellows working between breaths, and his left hand, missing 2 fingers, gripped a lead pipe dark with rust and intent. Mrs. Miller. His voice emerged as a gravelly rumble from deep in his chest. You should have taken the offer. Sarah's fingers found the skillet. Her slate-gray eyes measured the distance. 12 feet to the hallway. Another 8 to the children. Too far. Too slow. The hammer moved first. His boots thudded against the slanted floorboards, each step a declaration of inevitability. He struggled with the tilt, his bulk working against him, but he compensated with the raw momentum of a man accustomed to breaking through obstacles. Sarah ran. She sprinted toward the hallway, her body flowing with the house's lean instead of fighting it. The familiar ropes blurred past. She grabbed one, using the tension to slingshot herself around the corner. Behind her, the hammer cursed as his shoulder crashed into the doorframe he'd misjudged. The second-floor hallway stretched before her at its impossible angle. Sarah's boots found purchase on the groaning boards, her counterlean ingrained through months of adaptation. She could hear the hammer behind her, his heavy breathing punctuated by the squeal of stressed wood. She ducked into the children's bedroom. The furniture, bolted to the floor against the tilt, created a maze of obstacles. Sarah slid between the bed and the wall, her wiry frame navigating spaces the hammer's bulk couldn't follow. She emerged on the other side as he crashed through the doorway, the pipe raised. Sarah pivoted, sprinting back toward the kitchen. Up and down had become meaningless terms, redefined by the constant lean. She used the slope, let gravity pull her faster, her fingers trailing along the guide ropes for balance. The kitchen materialized around her. The cast-iron stove, secured by the thick tension ropes Elias had installed, dominated the eastern wall. Sarah grabbed one of the ropes, her yellowed calluses absorbing the friction without protest. The hammer appeared in the doorway, his sallow complexion slick with exertion. Sarah launched. She swung across the kitchen, the rope's arc carrying her in a trajectory the house's downward slope amplified into terrifying momentum. Her boots connected with the hammer's chest, both feet, full force. The impact reverberated through her legs, up her spine, into her clenched jaw. The hammer flew backward. His massive frame crashed into the brick pantry wall with a wet thud. He slumped, the pipe clattering from his damaged hand, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sarah dropped from the rope, stumbling, her vision swimming. She scrambled toward the pantry, her fingers reaching for the children, for safety, for any surface to pull herself upright. Her hand brushed cold brass. She stopped. Blinked. The brass handle protruded from the wall where an apron hook should hang. Sarah had passed this spot 1,000 times, had hung dish towels on this exact hook, had never questioned its presence. She pulled. The heavy thrum of counterweights moving behind plaster filled the small space. Cedar and old dust, scents she hadn't smelled in 3 years, wafted through suddenly shifting air. The back wall of the pantry began to pivot on a concealed central hinge, the shelving rotating inward to reveal darkness beyond. A passage. A secret passage lined with soundproofing insulation and reinforced with steel beams. Level. Impossibly, wonderfully level. Elias. His name escaped as barely a whisper. Sarah's mind reeled. How many nights had he worked while she slept? How many lies of fixing the foundation had masked the construction of this hidden lifeboat? He'd known. He'd known the house was dying and had built them a sanctuary within the corpse. The hammer groaned behind her. Sarah spun toward the kitchen where her children waited. Emma. Thomas. Here. Now. They came without question, their small bodies navigating the tilt with practiced ease. Sarah grabbed them, pulling them into the pantry, her hands trembling as she guided them into the dark passage. The crawlspace stretched beyond the reach of her vision, disappearing into cedar-lined shadows. Emma hesitated at the threshold, her eyes wide. Go. Sarah cupped her daughter's face, forcing eye contact. Crawl as far as you can. Don't make a sound. No matter what you hear, screaming, crashing, anything, you stay silent. You stay hidden. Do you understand? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thomas. Sarah turned to her son, whose 7-year-old frame shook like a leaf. Your sister needs you to be brave. Can you do this? Yes, Mama. His voice came small and thin. I'll be right behind you. Sarah kissed his forehead. I promise. I just need to secure the door. The children crawled into the darkness. Sarah watched them disappear into the cedar shadows, her heart fracturing with each inch they moved away from her. She turned to follow, 1 foot already on the threshold. The house screamed. Not the usual groaning of stressed timber, but a bone-deep shriek of structural failure. The foundation lurched, dropping several inches toward the northern corner. Sarah's foot slipped. The floor beneath her gave way with a jarring thud, and she crashed backward onto the kitchen tiles. Air rushed past her face. The sudden shift created a vacuum in the hallway, rattling the few remaining windows. Sarah scrambled to her knees, reaching for the passage. The secret door swung shut. The heavy wood moved with terrible speed, powered by counterweights and fail-safe mechanisms Elias had engineered into the hinge. The pivot engaged a mechanical deadbolt with a metallic click. Final. Absolute. No. Sarah clawed at the wood, her fingernails splitting against the cedar. Emma. Thomas. Silence answered her. The soundproofing worked perfectly. Her children were entombed in safety while she remained exposed in a house falling apart. Behind her, the hammer's breathing changed. Steadied. Recovered. Sarah turned. He stood in the pantry doorway, the lead pipe retrieved and gripped in his damaged hand. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, but his expression had shifted from rage to something far worse. Amusement. He stalked toward her, his boots crunching on scattered debris. Sarah pressed her back against the locked door, the very wall hiding her children, and raised her fists. Useless. Pathetic. But she raised them anyway. The hammer stopped 3 feet away. He raised the pipe, holding it high enough for Sarah to see the dried blood already staining the metal. High enough for her to imagine what came next. Then he lowered it. A cruel smirk spread across his sallow face. His eyes, flat and dead as river stones, swept over Sarah's defensive posture, her protective stance against the wall, the way her fingers still reached toward the seam of the hidden door. You're not running anymore. His voice came quiet, almost thoughtful. You're defending something. Sarah's breathing stopped. The hammer dropped the pipe to his side, the metal clanging against the floor. Makes a man curious. He leaned closer, and Sarah smelled diesel and old sweat. What could be worth dying for behind a pantry wall? Nothing. The lie emerged steady despite the terror singing through her veins. There's nothing. Then why'd you pull the trigger? He gestured toward the brass handle, still hanging loose from her desperate motion. Why'd you open a secret door you've been walking past for years? Sarah said nothing. Her fingers drummed against her thigh, 1, 2, 3, counting seconds, calculating odds, finding no escape. The hammer studied her face with the clinical detachment of a man who'd learned to read fear the way others read books. Then he smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. I wasn't sent here just to scare you into leaving, Mrs. Miller. He straightened, rolling his massive shoulders. I was sent because you're sitting on something valuable. Something your husband died protecting. The words punched through Sarah's chest like a blade. Elias's death. Her voice cracked. The scaffolding collapse. Wasn't an accident. The hammer's smile widened. I loosened the bolts myself. Watched him fall. Watched him break. He paused, savoring her horror. He died before he could tell Vane where he hid the ledger. Ledger. Sarah's mind spun, grasping at meaning through the grief threatening to drown her. Mineral survey. Property rights. Proof the ground under this shithole house sits on a vein worth more than this entire county. The hammer tapped his damaged fingers against the pipe. Your husband discovered it. Documented it. Hid the evidence somewhere Vane couldn't find. He stepped closer, his massive frame blocking any path of escape. But I figured it out. His gravelly voice dropped to a whisper. It's in the clock. Sarah's heart stopped. The grandfather clock. Elias's clock. The one in the foyer with the face he'd custom machined, the gears he'd assembled by hand during long winter nights when he thought she was asleep. The clock hummed in response, as if hearing its name. The subsonic vibration made Sarah's teeth ache. The hammer heard nothing. He simply raised the pipe again, his expression shifting back to cold efficiency. So here's what happens next, Mrs. Miller. You're going to open the clock. You're going to give me the ledger. And if you're very, very cooperative. He glanced toward the locked secret door. Maybe I won't pull your children out of whatever hole you've stuffed them in. The sirens shrieked closer. Blue and red light pulsed through every window. The authorities were seconds away. But the hammer didn't care. He had Sarah cornered, her children locked behind a wall, and the truth about Elias's murder hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah's fingers stopped their rhythm. She met the hammer's dead eyes and felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear. Not anymore. Fury. Sarah's fingers closed around the frayed edge of the Persian rug, a remnant from a life when this house had stood straight and proud. The hammer advanced through the kitchen doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the pulsing blue and red lights bleeding through the warped windows. The lead pipe swung at his side like a pendulum counting down her final seconds. Her slate-gray eyes measured the distance. 12 feet of slanted hardwood separated them. The rug ran the length of the kitchen floor, its tasseled edge bunched against the low side wall where gravity had dragged it over months of settling. One chance. The hammer's boots thudded against the floorboards, each step a declaration of inevitability. His breathing came heavy, in, like a bellows working between breaths. The pipe rose. Sarah pulled. The rug ripped free from its anchoring weight with a sound like canvas tearing. The hammer's lead foot, already committed to the next step, found nothing but polished hardwood rendered glass smooth by the 15-degree incline. His arms windmilled. The pipe flew from his three-fingered grip, clattering into the darkness. Momentum carried him downward. His massive body slid along the tilted floor, picking up speed as physics claimed him. He crashed into the cast-iron stove with a sound Sarah would hear in her nightmares, metal meeting skull, final and absolute. The impact reverberated through the floor joists, up through Sarah's boots, into her clenched jaw. The hammer crumpled. Blood seeped from a gash above his ear, spreading across the warped boards in a pattern gravity dictated. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Unconscious. Maybe dying. Sarah didn't wait to find out. She spun toward the counter where the grandfather clock stood, Elias's clock, with its brass housing and hand-machined face catching the strobing emergency lights. Her calloused fingers wrapped around the wooden base. Heavy. Heavier than she remembered. The mechanism inside hummed against her palms, a subsonic vibration carrying secrets her husband had died protecting. The front door hung crooked in its frame, the gap yawning wide where the deadbolt refused to catch. Sarah ran. Her body flowed with the house's lean instead of fighting it, each step a practiced countermotion. The hallway blurred past. The ropes swayed like dead vines. Behind her, the hammer groaned, a wet, bubbling sound promising vengeance. The door materialized before her. Rain hammered against the salt-crusted windows, each drop exploding into crystalline fragments. Through the distorted glass, halogen beams cut through the storm, twin columns of white light piercing the darkness. They came. The police. The authorities. The county workers she'd called 3 hours ago when the first threatening letter had arrived. Sarah's heart surged with something she'd forbidden herself to feel in the months since Elias's murder. Hope. Her fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, slick with sweat and grime and the desperate adrenaline singing through her veins. The mechanism ground against bent metal, useless, always useless, but the door swung open anyway, pulled by gravity and her momentum. Wind slammed into her face. Rain soaked through her threadbare sweater in seconds. The halogen lights blazed brighter, closer, painting the porch boards in stark relief. Sarah stumbled onto the crooked platform, shielding her eyes from the glare. Please. The word ripped from her throat, raw and genuine. My children, inside, there's a man. The engine cut out. Silence rushed in to fill the space, broken only by the howling wind and the distant crash of waves against rocks 300 feet below. Not the aggressive idle of a police cruiser. Not the diesel rumble of a county van. Something else. The driver's door of the sleek black SUV opened with a hydraulic hiss. A figure emerged into the rain, pristine and impossibly calm. Charcoal overcoat. Silver blonde hair immaculate despite the storm. Pale blue eyes catching the porch light with the cold gleam of surgical steel. Julian Vane stepped into the mud without hesitation, his Italian leather shoes sinking into the mire as if such things were beneath his notice. Sarah's hope died. Mrs. Miller. His voice carried across the space between them, quiet, rhythmic, mid-Atlantic accent polished to a weapon's edge. You should have accepted my offer when it was generous. The clock's weight doubled in Sarah's arms. Behind her, Wood groaned. The front door swung wider on its compromised hinges, and the hammer filled the frame. Blood streaked down his sallow face, mixing with rain. His eyes, flat and dead as river stones, fixed on Sarah with concussed rage. Trapped. The porch stretched 15 feet from door to railing, barely 6 feet wide. Julian Vane advanced from the muddy yard. The hammer lurched forward from the house. Sarah pressed against the splintering banister, the grandfather clock clutched against her chest like a shield. Take her. Julian Vane's words emerged soft as silk, deadly as arsenic. The hammer moved first. His massive hand reached for Sarah's shoulder. She twisted, using the porch's slant to slide beneath his grasp. The clock swung wide. Julian Vane lunged, his manicured fingers closing around the brass housing. Give it to me. Not a request. A command wrapped in the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to obedience. Sarah yanked backward. The hammer's arm snaked around her waist, pinning her against his chest. She drove her elbow into his ribs, once, twice, but the blows glanced off muscle and bone with no effect. Julian Vane pulled at the clock. The three of them struggled in a grotesque dance, shifting the center of gravity on the already compromised structure. The porch screamed. Not the usual groan of stressed timber, but a high, keening shriek of wood accepting its own death. The floorboards beneath Sarah's feet lurched. The house tilted another 3 degrees toward the waiting Atlantic. The hammer's hand closed around Sarah's throat. Air vanished. The world compressed into a single point of agony where his damaged fingers crushed her windpipe. He lifted, effortlessly, as if Sarah weighed nothing at all, and dangled her over the railing. Below, jagged rocks jutted from churning foam. 300 feet of empty space yawned beneath her kicking legs. Rain pelted her face. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the abyss in stark, terrible detail. Julian Vane stepped closer, his pale eyes level with Sarah's bulging ones. He ignored her gasps, her clawing fingers, the way her legs thrashed against nothing. His gaze fixed solely on the clock pressed against her chest. The artifact, Mrs. Miller. Each syllable precise. Surrender it, and I allow him to pull you back. Sarah's vision darkened at the edges. Her fingers drummed against her thigh, 1, 2, 3, counting seconds she didn't have. The clock hummed against her ribs, Elias's final gift vibrating with purpose she couldn't decode. Julian Vane's face filled her fading sight. No mercy in those pale eyes. No humanity. Only the cold calculation of a man solving an equation where her life equaled a minor variable. She opened her mouth. No air came. No words. Her children's faces flashed behind her eyes, Emma's too-old expression, Thomas's trembling frame. Somewhere in the locked passage, they waited. Alone. Hidden in cedar-lined darkness while their mother strangled 3 feet above them. The house answered with gunfire. Sharp cracks split the air, timber snapping under stress it could no longer bear. The main supports, weakened by decades of erosion and tonight's violence, finally surrendered to gravity's patient siege. The porch separated from the foyer. Sarah, the hammer, and Julian Vane stumbled as the floor lurched seaward. The banister splintered. The roof groaned. The entire structure tilted another 5 degrees, picking up momentum as it began its slow slide toward the rocks. The hammer's grip loosened. Sarah crashed onto the shifting boards, gasping. Air flooded her lungs, sweet, precious, burning. She rolled onto her side, arms still wrapped around the clock, and met Julian Vane's gaze. "My children." The words scraped from her ruined throat. "CPS, the county workers, are miles away." Julian Vane crouched beside her, his overcoat spreading across the wet boards like raven wings. "I intercepted them. 3 towns over. My security team can be very persuasive." The world stopped. "Your children," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute victory, "are in my vehicle. Watching. No rescue is coming, Mrs. Miller. No help. No hope." Sarah's fingers stopped their rhythm. She stared into the face of the men who'd orchestrated everything, Elias's death, the threats, the siege, the lies, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not fear. Fury. Julian Vane nodded once. The hammer hauled his sledgehammer from where it hung at his belt, not the lead pipe, but the real tool, the namesake weapon Sarah had heard whispered about in town. Iron head. Ash handle. Purpose absolute. He raised it high. Sarah didn't run. Didn't plead. She curled into herself, wrapping her body around the brass clock the way a mother shields her child. The housing pressed against her spine. The mechanism hummed louder, faster, building toward something she couldn't name. The sledgehammer fell. Terminal velocity. Iron meeting flesh. The impact should have shattered ribs, crushed organs, ended everything. Instead, a golden chime erupted. Pure. Resonant. Beautiful beyond measure. The sound vibrated through Sarah's bones, through the porch boards, through the very atoms of the storm. Rain stopped midair. The ocean's roar cut to silence. Color bled from the world, leaving only shades of gray. The hammer froze, arm extended, face twisted in effort, body locked mid-swing like a statue carved from living flesh. Julian Vane stood motionless 3 feet away, his expression caught between triumph and something else. Surprise. Fear. Recognition of power he couldn't control. Sarah drew breath. The air tasted like copper and ozone, an impossible possibility. The world had stopped. And she was the only thing still moving. The silence pressed against Sarah's eardrums like deep water. Plaster dust hung suspended, tiny diamonds frozen mid-fall, caught in the moment between destruction and impact. The storm's roar had vanished. The ocean's thunder, silenced. Even the terrible shriek of splintering wood had cut to nothing, leaving only the rhythmic tick-tock-tick of the grandfather clock pressed against her ribs. Sarah drew breath. The air resisted, thick as honey, forcing her lungs to work for every molecule of oxygen. Her slate-gray eyes swept the parlor, cataloging the impossible scene before her. Julian Vane stood 3 feet away, his pale eyes wide with an emotion she'd never seen on his face. Fear. The hammer loomed behind him, frozen mid-lunge, the sledgehammer suspended at the apex of its deadly arc. The world had stopped. But the house hadn't. Sarah's inner ear screamed the truth her eyes refused to accept. The floor beneath her boots continued its inexorable slide seaward. Slower now, agonizingly slow, but relentless. The massive structure's momentum, carried by thousands of tons of timber and stone and memory, couldn't be halted by something as simple as frozen time. Physics didn't care about miracles. Inertia demanded its due. Her fingers found her thigh. 1, 2, 3. The familiar rhythm grounded her spiraling thoughts. Elias's voice echoed through the pressurized silence, a memory wrapped in coal dust and wire-rimmed glasses. 7 seconds of objective time equals 49 seconds for you, love. Not much. But enough, if you use it right. 49 seconds. Sarah's gaze snapped to the grandfather clock. The pendulum hung at the far left of its arc, vibrating with suppressed energy. The brass housing hummed against her chest, not the gentle subsonic purr from before, but an urgent thrumming like a heart preparing to burst. 49 seconds to defy gravity. 49 seconds to save her children. 49 seconds before the house completed its plunge into the Atlantic and took everything she'd protected with it into the churning foam below. The floorboards groaned, a subaudible frequency Sarah absorbed through her boots, up her shins, into her clenched jaw. She recognized the sound. The house announcing its surrender. The balance point shifting past the point of no return. Unless you shift it elsewhere. Elias's lessons flooded through her consciousness. The house was never designed to resist the land's movement. The 15-degree tilt wasn't a failure of engineering, it was intentional. A keystone principle. The structure moved with the earth, absorbing the stress through controlled deflection instead of rigid opposition. Sarah's eyes measured the architecture with new understanding. The west wing's weight pressed against the central hearth. The kitchen's mass counterbalanced the parlor. Every timber, every rope, every iron ring formed part of a massive equilibrium equation her husband had spent years perfecting. She couldn't stop the slide through force. But she could manipulate the center of gravity. Her children. Herself. Living weights on a tilting platform. Move them, and the entire calculation changed. Sarah released the clock. The brass housing tumbled through the viscous air, falling with dreamlike slowness toward the warped floorboards. She didn't wait to see it land. Her boots found purchase on the upturned edge of a plank, and she launched herself toward the hallway. Moving through the frozen world required a counterintuitive rhythm. Push too hard, and the air's resistance doubled. Flow with it, and the viscosity became a medium to glide through. Sarah's body adapted automatically, years of living on the slant translating into grace within the temporal distortion. The hallway stretched before her. The tarred sea ropes swayed, caught mid-swing. Sarah grabbed the nearest one, using it to propel herself along the tilted corridor. Her calloused palms absorbed the friction without flinching. 17 feet. 12. 8. The nursery door stood ajar. Sarah hit its shoulder first. The wood groaned, a real sound, not frozen like everything else, and swung inward. The hinges squealed their protest into the pressurized silence. Emma and Thomas huddled in the far corner. Her children. Frozen like wax statues. Emma's too-old expression locked in a grimace of pure terror. Thomas's small frame crouched beside his sister, arms wrapped around her waist, eyes squeezed shut against horrors an 8-year-old shouldn't witness. Sarah's throat constricted. Not with fear. With fury so absolute it became a physical force in her chest. She crossed the room in 3 strides. Her arms wrapped around both children, lifting them together. The viscous air made them heavier, physics demanding payment for every miracle, but Sarah's climber's muscles didn't falter. She'd carried 100-pound flour sacks up the ridge path in winter. Her children weighed nothing compared to that. The hallway blurred past. The ropes swayed. The house groaned its subaudible warning, the pitch climbing higher as the structure accelerated toward oblivion. Sarah burst through the front door, wedged open by a frozen gust of wind, and stumbled onto the crooked porch. Rain hung suspended. Droplets caught mid-explosion against the salt-crusted boards. Lightning painted the sky in shades of leaden gray, frozen at the moment of maximum brightness. The driveway materialized 15 feet beyond the porch railing. Solid ground. Stable earth untouched by the house's suicidal slide. Sarah's boots hammered against the warped planks. She vaulted the splintering banister, children clutched against her chest, and landed hard on gravel. The impact drove breath from her lungs. She rolled, absorbing the momentum, protecting Emma and Thomas with her body. Sharp stones tore through her threadbare sweater. She didn't care. Her children were safe. Off the tilting platform. Beyond the reach of the mudslide waiting to claim the house. Sarah deposited them on the ground, gently, reverently, and spun toward the doomed structure. 30 seconds remained. The house hung over the cliff's edge like a suicide contemplating the jump. The back porch had already splintered, boards tumbling through frozen air toward the rocks below. The main structure teetered at the fulcrum, held by nothing more than inertia and the stubborn refusal of timber to accept its fate. Sarah ran. Not away. Toward. Her boots found the porch boards. The floor tilted another 2 degrees, she absorbed the shift through her counterlean, body angling to compensate. The grandfather clock waited where she'd dropped it, brass housing gleaming dully in the frozen lightning's glow. Her fingers closed around the wooden base. Heavy. So heavy. But necessary. The winding key jutted from the clock's side panel, an ornate piece of hand-machined brass Elias had spent months perfecting. Sarah's calloused fingers wrapped around the cold metal and pulled. The key resisted. Gears ground against decades of dust and neglect. Sarah braced her boot against the clock's base and yanked. Something inside snapped, not breaking, but releasing. The key slid free with a sound like a sword leaving its scabbard. This was never about time. This was about the land. The house shuddered. Sarah's boots slipped on the warped boards. She caught herself on a rope, arm screaming protest, and hauled herself upright. The foyer materialized through the doorway, a yawning maw of darkness punctuated by frozen plaster dust. 15 seconds. The Persian rug had slid away during the initial assault, bunched against the low side wall where gravity had claimed it. The floorboards beneath lay exposed. Sarah's eyes tracked the grain of the wood, searching for the irregularity Elias had described in whispered conversations she'd dismissed as engineer's fantasy. There. A panel approximately 3 feet square. Brass hinges visible only because the house's extreme tilt had warped the frame enough to reveal them. Sarah dropped to her knees, fingers scrabbling at the edge. The wood refused to budge. The house groaned. Not the usual protest of stressed timber, but a deep, bass rumble Sarah recognized from mine collapses. The sound of structure accepting terminal failure. 10 seconds. Sarah drove the winding key into the gap between panel and floor. She levered upward. Wood shrieked. The panel popped open, revealing a brass-lined socket drilled deep into the foundation. The socket glowed with a faint milky blue luminescence. Minerals from the Blackwood mine, reacting to trace moisture. The same blue glow Sarah saw at night when she stared down at the flooded entrance 300 feet below her porch. The house's descent wasn't a failure. It was the locking sequence. The socket only aligned with the subterranean anchors when the building reached this exact degree of inclination. A failsafe designed for catastrophic geological shifts. Or deliberate sabotage. 5 seconds. Sarah jammed the winding key into the socket. Resistance. The gears, fouled by dust and time and the weight of secrets, refused to turn. Sarah put her entire weight, 112 pounds of wiry muscle and maternal fury, into the brass key. Her boots skidded on the tilted boards. Her shoulders screamed. The key remained motionless. The balance point, love. Find it, and everything else falls into place. Sarah shifted her stance. Not pushing straight down, but angling with the house's lean. Using gravity instead of fighting it. The key moved, a fraction of an inch, then another. Deep within the foundation, hundreds of feet below the soil, massive tumblers began to fall. The sound vibrated through Sarah's bones. Metal meeting stone. Ancient mechanisms waking from decades of dormancy. She twisted harder. The key rotated 90 degrees. 180. The final tumbler crashed into place with a sound like a vault door slamming shut. The house was bolted into the cliff's spine. 3 seconds. Sarah released the key and lunged toward the porch. The hammer stood frozen mid-stride, his massive body captured at the moment before impact. His hand reached for the tactical radio clipped to his vest, Julian Vane's expensive equipment, military-grade encryption, direct line to whatever corrupted authorities he'd bought. Sarah's fingers closed around the radio. She yanked it free, thumbs already working the controls. The emergency band. The frequency she'd memorized during long, sleepless nights planning scenarios she'd prayed would never come. Her voice scraped from her ruined throat. Officer down. 316 Cliff Road. Multiple assailants. Children in danger. The words disappeared into the viscous air, trapped like the rain and the plaster and the inevitable violence. Waiting for time's return. 1 second. Sarah crashed through the doorway onto the porch. Emma and Thomas waited on the gravel, safe, frozen, beyond the reach of what came next. Julian Vane stood by his black SUV, expression caught between triumph and dawning horror. The hammer loomed above her, sledgehammer suspended at the killing point. The 49th second expired. Reality detonated. Sound slammed into Sarah's eardrums, the storm's roar, the ocean's thunder, the shriek of metal meeting stone. The house shuddered beneath her boots. Not the slow, inexorable slide toward destruction, but a violent, instantaneous cessation of movement. The locking bolts fired into bedrock with the force of cannon shot. The entire structure snapped rigid. Anchored. Immovable. A fortress embedded in the granite of the coastline instead of a coffin sliding toward the Atlantic. The hammer's eyes widened. Physics reclaimed its debt with interest. Kinetic energy, robbed of its gradual dispersal, exploded outward. The hammer, prepared for a gentle slide, braced for controlled descent, found himself standing on a platform that had transformed from moving object to immovable foundation in the space between heartbeats. Momentum catapulted him forward. His massive body sailed off the porch in a graceless arc, arms windmilling, mouth open in a scream the wind stole. He crashed into the mud at the slope's bottom with a wet, final thud. Alive. Conscious. But pinned by the thick, viscous earth Julian Vane's illegal drilling had destabilized. The floorboards beneath Sarah's boots split apart. Not breaking, opening. Forced upward by the pressure of the locking mechanism. From the hidden cavity within the foundation's keystone, a lead-lined cylinder emerged like a corpse surfacing from deep water. Sarah's fingers closed around the cold metal. She pried the cylinder open. Inside, protected by centuries of darkness, lay a rolled parchment bearing the seal of the crown. The original land grant. 1,800 acres of cliffside property granted to the Miller family in perpetuity. Beneath the parchment, modern geological surveys. Computer printouts. Detailed schematics showing slant drilling trajectories that originated on Julian Vane's construction site and terminated directly beneath Sarah's kitchen floor. Evidence. Undeniable. Federal. Blue and red lights crested the hill. Not the phantom rescue Sarah had prayed for. Real police cruisers, summoned by the radio burst she'd sent during the freeze. Their sirens split the pre-dawn darkness as they descended the winding dirt road. Julian Vane stood beside his SUV, jaw slack, staring at the house that refused to fall. His pale eyes tracked the emergency vehicles, then shifted to the hammer trapped in the mud, then settled on Sarah standing victorious on her porch. The first ray of sunlight broke over the Atlantic. Sarah walked to the porch's edge, the ruined winding key clutched in her scarred hand. The house stood level, truly level, for the first time in months. The locking mechanism had done more than anchor the structure. It had corrected the tilt, forcing the foundation into alignment with the bedrock below. Julian Vane's gaze met hers across the muddy expanse. Sarah's lips curved into something too cold to be called a smile. Her voice carried across the space between them, low, sparse, rationed like everything else in her life. Timing is everything, Julian. It's a shame you're about to start serving a very long sentence.